a scientific survey mission, Kirk suddenly gets a whiff of something that rattles him. He tells his men to watch out for a vaporous cloud. Since they're red shirts, naturally the threat finds them and attacks, offing 2 of them, and very nearly killing— Wait, this guy's name is Rizzo? Seriously? Well, I would make a joke about his name, but that's the worst thing I could do. When Kirk and Spock find them, they find that every blood cell in their bodies have simply disappeared. Kirk isn't surprised by this, but does seem extremely terrified, which is unusual for the normally unflappable captain of the Enterprise. Back in sickbay, Kirk tells McCoy and Spock that there were similar cases of sudden no-blood-itis 11 years ago on the first starship he served on, the Farragut. The Enterprise is due to rendezvous at the USS Yorktown to pick up some time-sensitive vaccines, but Kirk decides the ship needs to stay until the threat is neutralized, and the dying people who need medicine. So we have our ticking clock for the episode. Rizzo quickly dies of his injuries, making their situation seem all the more critical. Kirk summons the Enterprise's new security officer, Ensign Garrovick, who incidentally is the son of Kirk's old captain from the Farragut. Kirk orders Garrovick to gather a security team so they can all beam down and hunt the monster. On the surface, the vampire cloud appears and kills yet another crewman, and Garrovick freezes in a moment of terror and fails to act. Kirk relieves Garrovick of duty and confines him to quarters. McCoy comments that Kirk was a little hard on him. On the bridge, Scotty and Uhura advise Kirk that they need to leave soon and meet with the Yorktown, to which Kirk accuses his senior crew of conspiring against him, and barks at Chekov for not having found the vampire cloud yet. Kirk's erratic behavior disturbs everyone. McCoy comes to Kirk's quarters and lays out plainly the subtext of the episode. Jim is lashing out at the crew, and Garrovick in particular, because he's reliving the trauma and survivor's guilt that his first interaction with the vampire cloud left him with. Kirk watched 200 of his fellow crew members, including his captain, die, and is fixated on a moment where he, similar to Ensign Garrovick, froze and failed to fire on the creature. Jim blames himself for their deaths, but Bones points out that even if he hadn't panicked, he still might not have been able to stop the thing.
Am I letting the horrors of the past distort my judgment of the present?
I love when Bones gets to be the emotionally intelligent core of the show. Spock may know all things science, and Kirk may be the expert in leadership, but Bones knows people. His often gruff and curmudgeonly nature masks a deep understanding of the human condition. Remember, Bones is the id, which isn't all about desire and hedonism. The id is the heart, dealing in all things involving feelings. Bones lets Kirk know that he and Spock have opened an inquiry into if Kirk is fit for command in his current mental state. They question him, and Kirk manages to convince them that he's still capable of doing his job. Chekov comes in to let them know that the vampire cloud is fleeing the planet. The Enterprise gives chase, but suddenly the vampire cloud whips around and infiltrates the ship through the ventilation system, killing yet another crew member, giving this episode the highest dead shirt count so far. Spock lets both Kirk and Garrovick, who spent most of the episode in his quarters throwing himself a pity party, know that the vampire cloud is unaffected by phaser weapons, and therefore neither of them should blame themselves for their dead crewmates. The vampire cloud ekes into Garrovick's quarters through the vents, looking for its next snack, but Spock drives it off with his unappetizing copper-based Vulcan blood. Kirk and Garrovick have a heart-to-heart about how neither of them should blame themselves for their failure to shoot the creature, and Kirk orders the ensign back on duty. Kirk intuits that the vampire cloud is fleeing back to its home, back to where it attacked the Farragut all those years ago. Since their regular energy weapons won't finish the job, Spock and Kirk hatch a plan to lure the creature in with a big vat of blood from the medbay's bank and then blow it to hell with antimatter. Garrovick volunteers for the mission, eager to redeem himself. There's a moment when Kirk and Garrovick come close to being the vampire cloud's dessert, but they cleverly time the beam up and the antimatter detonation by the skin of their teeth, destroying the vampire cloud once and for all. The Enterprise sets out to rendezvous with the Yorktown, and Kirk promises Garrovick to tell him some stories about his dad sometime. Ah, my poor Jimothy and his increasingly tragic backstory. I see Obsession as the sister story to Conscience of the King from the first season, both episodes incidentally being the 13th episodes of their respective seasons. 13 is culturally known as an unlucky number. Both Conscience and Obsession reveal a previously untold traumatic moment in Kirk's life. Due to the episodic nature of Star Trek, these pieces of character information won't come up again, but I still think they can be taken into account when studying Kirk as a character. We've seen that Kirk, like any good captain should, cares deeply about the lives under his command, and it's like a personal loss when one of his officers perish. That's just the responsible and compassionate person Kirk is. But I think Obsession adds an extra layer to that. Kirk suffers from an extreme case of survivor's guilt due to the massacred crew of the Farragut, and feels compelled not to lose any more comrades to this monster. Defeating the vampire cloud, similar to arresting Kodos for his crimes, would probably feel to Kirk like bringing some peace to those lost souls. Also, in both episodes, Kirk's ability to command is questioned, including an intervention on Spock and Bones' behalf to discuss whether Kirk is thinking clearly. You know shit is serious when our superego and id characters are working together and our ego is out of the loop. Now, you might remember that I was pretty judgmental of Lieutenant Bailey from the Corbomite maneuver when he experienced a moment of terror. I'm inclined to feel more sympathy for Garrovick in this moment. See, Bailey was safe and cozy on the Enterprise when the space beacon popped up. He had no reason to believe the thing was a threat. It was just a floating light. I can't help but think that if you're going to explore the reaches of space, you need to get used to encountering random shit. Garrovick, on the other hand, is facing an entity he knows has already claimed 3 lives, with no protection but a piddly little phaser. He has a legitimate reason to be scared of the vampire cloud. Also, all things considered, he only froze for a second. It's not like he screamed and took off running like a coward. So, yeah, I'm with McCoy here. Kirk was harsh on him, and is 100% projecting his own trauma and survivor's guilt onto Garrovick, who is in a similar position that Kirk himself occupied on the Farragut 11 years ago. A young, terrified officer thrust into a deadly situation and watching his friends die around him. It makes sense that Kirk punishes him for honest mistakes like freezing in a moment of panic because they're mistakes Kirk made when he was in Garrovick's place. Kirk is really punishing himself. Garrovick is a purposeful mirror for Kirk. No, not that kind of mirror. He's the kind of mirror that's used to reflect the main character and say something about their feelings, their conflicts. And in this brief scene in the corridor between Kirk and Garrovick, Kirk is letting Garrovick know that he doesn't have to feel guilty about his momentary lapse in courage. And in essence, Kirk is forgiving himself.
No weapon known would have made any difference. Then, or 11 years ago.
Jim is never going to stop caring about everyone or trying his damnedest to keep them all alive. That's just who he is, the guy who doesn't believe in no-win scenarios. But in this moment, it's nice that Kirk can forgive himself for a burden he's been carrying for so long.
It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Obsession borrows greatly from the plot of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, which is a story about a revenge-seeking captain who is fixated on hunting down a white whale that hurt him in the past. Stories about seafaring adventures are ripe for adaptation in Star Trek, being far from what's familiar, the obstacles one faces out in the unknown, the uncertainty of never reaching home again. It's all the same, just less water in space. And this won't be the last time Trek takes inspiration from Melville. Allusions to Moby Dick also feature in the second Star Trek feature film, The Wrath of Like in Obsession, someone fanatically pursues an enemy that wronged them. And there's one more similarity of note between them.
Don't misunderstand my next question. Mr. Spock, why aren't you dead?
Aren't you dead?
Something's changed.
Oh, it's a new cologne. My barber suggests.
No, I know what you smell like.